Alright, so by the time this video will be released, it'll most likely be October. And honestly, I was thinking, like, what better way to start off the spooky month with none other than one of my favorite killers of all time, Pumpkin Man. I think those who have been around with me longer than 2019 have recognized the significance that this character has brought to me. I'll never forget that October where I spent the whole month working on an 11th track mixtape, which simply took on the narrative of this fictional serial killer and described his life through his words and some amateur hip-hop beats I produced out of GarageBand out of my old iPhone 8. It was fun then, and I always smile whenever I reminisce on those times. Now that you've been following me on my channel, I'm sure you've only taken notice that I enjoy creating short films and little projects. The About Me page literally says it's my creative dump. Anything I make is what I choose to share to these 5 people watching. I love you guys. But anyways, I recently found a 15-page description of this film I wanted to work on in the future, which is called Pumpkin Man. It was going to be a dark, comedic, and horror-based thriller that would have been set in the 80s in New York City. It would have mainly been about Pumpkin Man, or his real alias I gave to him, Phillip-Jackson Brookes, a college freshman who goes out at night to stalk and prey. He's ordered by God, or his depiction of God, who's named Lucy, to kill and sacrifice innocent blood to save New York from natural disasters. These motives were heavily inspired by Herbert Mullen, a schizophrenic serial killer who murdered 13 people because he claimed that it would save California from earthquakes, and because, well, he said God told him to. I was so intrigued when I first heard about Mullen, and I wanted to make something which was inspired by his murders. I also wanted to make something that would have been pretty simple and comedic too. And this is what I got. So, without further ado, here is simply titled Pumpkin Man. The film opens up to Phillip-Jackson Brookes, sleeping through his alarm clock which blares across his apartment. A head, deprived of its body, sits by the corner of Philip's room and yells at the top of it screams at Philip to wake the hell up. Philip is startled and wrestling out of his blood-drenched sheets. He gets up and hurries to get to class on time. We would have gotten to see his sloppy morning routine, which would have consisted of brushing his teeth while brushing his hair and admiring himself in the mirror like a dumbass. Right as he steps out of the apartment, we would have moved back to the kitchen counter, which reveals Philip's keys, which means he locked himself out. No time to worry about this now, since Philip hurries to catch a train. Classes are in session as Philip makes it a little late to his first class, philosophy. We would have met the professor, Professor Bridges, who was astonished that Philip was the one who was late to class since he's been the one at the top of his class. Philip attempts to explain his reason of being so late, and that's when we do a quick jump cut to Pumpkin Man, who is slaughtering a woman on her couch. We jump back to present time where Philip still struggles to explain his reason. Professor Bridges brushes it aside and sends him to his seat. She announces a project for the class and assigns Philip with a shy classmate, Sean. We see his life outside of college and see how respectful he attempts to behave. As he returns home, he remembers how he forgot that he locked himself in, so Philip has no choice but to break himself into his apartment. The landlord soon arrives and is pissed at Philip because he's broken down a door and is 3 weeks late for rent. The landlord warns that Philip is going to get evicted soon if he doesn't pay up by the end of the week. Philip promises to pay up as soon as he gets his first paycheck, if he ever will. When questioned about it, Philip explains how he was recently fired from his new job because he accidentally backed up into his manager with his car. It was the first day too. The landlord doesn't buy his story and drills his warning even deeper into Philip's skull before even leaving. Philip is left distressed. He picks up the phone and dials his mother. The idea is that he's going to ask her for a loan. However, it deteriorates within his head as his father picks up the phone instead. We get a glimpse of the dysfunctional relationship he has with his father. He refuses to lend Philip another loan, and Philip should be considered grateful that he is at least getting his tuition fully paid for. His father hangs up, and Philip is left even more distressed and angered because he believes he deserves the loan. Stress begins to eat up at Philip, which pushes him to take a visit to a local bar. After taking countless shots of whiskey, looking like a depressed idiot, his eye catches a glimpse of a beautiful-looking woman by the corner, smoking a cigarette. Philip walks towards her and they both talk as if they've known each other for years. Lucy. Lucy takes note of Philip's dilemma and takes him to her penthouse where she plays records and gives him a blunt to ease his mind off things. She reassures Philip that all will go well. Philip questions Lucy where are his rewards for the tasks he completes for her. When will he discover satisfaction for life? Lucy soothes him and smooth talks her way to committing another sacrifice. Philip gets promised the money he needs to pay for his financial conflicts. He needs to get the job done for Lucy first. A storm is headed towards New York, and this one seems dangerous and might cause flooding across the city. Philip needs to sacrifice another abundance of blood to her. She's hungry. Philip is a bit reluctant to go out again and commit another sacrifice. However, Lucy talks her way into Philip's head, persuading him. It turns out that the blunt Philip was smoking was not only filled with weed, but it was also laced with acid. What follows would have been a tripped out scene. It will be edited with crazy hues of colors flashing across the scenes, shots of bugs and close-up of unsettling images, and it'll just be an insane ass scene for Philip. He dresses up as the Pumpkin Man, goes out to hunt for the sacrifice. He chases a man within the train, and after a successful murder, he gets off as he cleans his knife and dumps the body into another set of train tracks. A train is heard coming as Pumpkin Man walks away from the scene. After a crazy battle between Philip and his acid illusions take place within his apartment, which consists of a giant spider crawling by his door and a live skeleton prancing around his place attempting to harm Philip, we cut to the next morning where we are introduced to Detective Dennis, traveling from the West Coast and comes across these murders where he begins to see that there might be a serial killer on the loose. Detective Dennis decides to investigate these murders and is informed of a crushed corpse discovered in a subway train. Meanwhile, Philip is chilling at home listening to trip hop. He interacts with a talking head, and this is more of an amusing scene to watch. He later invites Sean over for the project and begin to work on it. We cut back to Detective Dennis where he is at the crime scene. He finds security cameras from the corner of the subway station and orders one of the security guards to review the footage. Through the security footage, we see the murder that the Pumpkin Man commits and the body being dumped into the train tracks. Detective Dennis pauses at the moment that Pumpkin Man's face is facing the camera. Officers argue that the detective should release the picture to the press and news stations so residents will stay alerted of a serial killer on the loose. Detective Dennis is hesitant, however, fearing that if he shares the photo, that'll risk the chances of him catching this killer. The captain takes the photo without Dennis's knowledge and plans to release it to the press. It's noted that this police department has no respect towards this new detective. Back at Philip's apartment, we see how Philip and Sean are beginning to connect with each other. We learn a little bit more about Sean and his childhood, and we learn a little bit more about Philip's childhood and how they kind of contrast each other since Sean grew up in a financial struggling home, but his parents gave him much love. While Philip, he grew up in a rich home, but his parents hardly even took care of him. After their deep conversation about reflecting on the past, Sean turns on the television to the local news, where Pumpkin Man's face is plastered through the screen. Philip shrieks from surprise, which startles Sean. However, he's more focused on the fact that a serial killer is on the loose now. Philip pretends to seem concerned as he only gets anxious as the news reporter goes on to retell the horrifying crime that the serial killer committed last night. The media warns viewers to be careful. We also see how Detective Dennis catches the news, and he's not so happy about the decision being made behind his back. Philip visits Lucy and informs her about how the cops know about him now. Lucy scolds Philip for being hella sloppy with his attempts to destroy any evidence left behind. However, she isn't so worried about it at all. This confuses Philip as he was expecting Lucy to be as shocked as he was. Lucy, on the other hand, reassures Philip that the police are going to do nothing about it. Philip is left confused, while Lucy just sits back and lights up another cigarette. Philip is still left paranoid despite Lucy's advice to take it easy. We use this transition over to the police precinct where Detective Dennis storms into the captain's office. They both argue about the photo being released. The captain argues that the public deserves to know what kind of problem we're dealing with right now. The detective argues back that this will only push the serial killer to become more stealthier and clear up more evidence, making it harder for the police to even catch him. The captain sends Detective Dennis off. He states that he should have never came to New York and orders two officers to escort Dennis to the airport as soon as possible. We take a break from Detective Dennis and follow back to Philip, who is becoming increasingly paranoid. His whole apartment is devoid of light as he has covered his windows with the furniture he has. A doorbell rings, which freaks Philip out, and only to see it's just Sean by the doorstep. Philip opens the door and quickly drags Sean in. Sean attempts to discuss the project, however, Philip seems way too distracted to even think about it right now. He freaks out at Sean, telling him to focus on him instead. He states how there is a dark cloud coming, and he doesn't feel safe. He feels as if he's being watched. Sean questions Philip about when was the last time he even slept. Philip ignores the question. He goes on a tangent about his stalkers and how this may be the last time he ever sees Sean. Sean has had enough of the crazy talk and tells Philip that he needs to get some rest. He's probably having some mental breakdown. He explains that he'll just finish the project by himself so Philip can catch a break from all the pressure he's been experiencing. He advises Philip to get his mind off of the troubles. An idea is lit within Philip's head. During the car ride to the airport, we see the conversation being shared between the dentist and the two officers, who are reckless and easygoing. The officers reveal that they simply don't care whether the serial killer is out on the streets, but at least they'll only make the public seem like they are looking out for them. Detective Dennis is shocked at what he's hearing, realizing how corrupt the police department is. The officers go on to talk about how they sometimes let criminals free for long periods of time in order to evoke fear into the public and forces them to stay under their control. Philip takes a visit to a porno theater as his way of getting his mind off things. He sits there in the auditorium with his popcorn by his lap and watching the adult film like a child watching a superhero movie. He's just hella pleased. Hold up, I gotta burp. He gets startled by Lucy, who appears behind him. She watches Philip and states that she isn't the only one watching him. We see a much older looking man who's checking on Philip from the end of the row. Lucy warns that perhaps he could be an undercover cop. Philip tells Lucy that he thought he'd be fine. Lucy states that he is, but there are still people who want him gone. Philip's paranoia returns. The older man gets closer to Philip and takes a seat next to him. Philip chickens out of the situation and tries to act cool, and he tells the man that he'll be right back. He signals Lucy to follow him outside. Lucy states that if he wants his old man to leave him alone, then he's going to have to fake it till he makes it. Philip is embarrassed and he doesn't want to get intimate. Lucy isn't talking about that though, but she reveals her plan in order to get this undercover cop off his back. So Philip goes back into the auditorium and tries to play along with the man. He leads the man back to Lucy's penthouse where he sits him down and teases that he'll be right back. The old man sits there in silence as he begins to unbuckle his belt. Silence fills the air. The old man finds this amusing as if Philip is attempting to hide from him. Suddenly, Pumpkin Man appears as he slashes through the curtains and into the old man. There's a fierce chase going on between the two around the penthouse. Pumpkin Man eventually murders the old man and leaves the body for Lucy to dispose of. Philip exits the building, feeling a little more at ease knowing that one of his stalkers is now gone. We catch up with Detective Dennis, who's at the airport, awaiting his flight. He reflects on the information that was being shared between him and the officers, but he chooses to take on this challenge alone. This serial killer is going down because Detective Dennis is for the people. The next morning we wake with Philip as he seems to be in a better mood than how he was in the previous days. He even gives a talking head a kiss because he's so fucking happy. It all falls apart as soon as he meets up with Sean for lunch. Sean reveals about a murder that took place yesterday and how it's already been printed and published on the papers. Philip is taken aback. He reads an article about a father being found stabbed to death and his body being left in an alleyway. It is the same man who Philip murdered and who flirted with him. He immediately shows this to Lucy. Philip lashes out at her and exclaiming why didn't she do better at hiding the body. Lucy keeps her composure and explains that it's fine. The cops don't even know that he did it, so why should he even be worried? Philip brings up the fact that the public knows about a serial killer being on the loose now, but Lucy shuts it down and tells Philip that she's getting tired of constantly having to reassure him about everything. Lucy tells Philip to go take a visit back to the porno theater since that ironically helped him get his mind off things. She jokes about how he might find a cute guy there too. Detective Dennis is around the street investigating the death of the father that was reported. He stops at the same porno theater that Philip is visiting right now as he explains that his investigation has led him to this place so far. Detective Dennis requests to review the security footage from the day before and sees cameras capturing Philip leaving with the man. One of the employees recognizes Philip, and just as they leave security room, they both spot Philip heading into the auditorium with popcorn and a beverage on both hands. Detective Dennis heads to Philip and he asks if he can answer a few questions. Philip is left disturbed. They have a discussion in the vacant lobby where Philip attempts to fabricate a story and claims that he doesn't know the man. Detective Dennis stops him and says that he has proof that says otherwise, and he knows what Philip is hiding. The detective teases Philip as if he is about to reveal to Philip that he knows he's the Pumpkin Man, only for him to say that he knew the man was gay. And he questions whether Philip shared any intimacy with him after they left. Philip is relieved and plays along and claims that the man left after they finished and stated that he was going on his way to purchase some cocaine. Detective Dennis is confused since he states that he was told that the man was clean from drugs. He never really had any interest in experimenting with drugs. He never even smoked. Philip attempts to argue that is a lie, and the man told him that he was going to purchase some cocaine. Detective Dennis leaves Philip alone, but he's still left a little confused and suspicious. Philip is relieved once the interview is over, but he takes note of how Detective Dennis is following him out of the porno theater. Philip is riding the subway train back home. He catches glimpses of Detective Dennis from another car. The train stops, and Philip looks out the window and thinks he sees the corpse of the dead man he murdered, rising up and running towards him. Philip runs out of the platform and back into the streets. His paranoia becomes worse as he thinks he hears Detective Dennis ordering him to halt. Philip scurries away back to his apartment. He vents to the talking head about his suspicion that Detective Dennis could be following him, but talking head just doubles down on those claims. Philip pauses his rant as he suspects he hears something crawling in the air vents. Philip takes out a kitchen knife and he begins to scream at the top of his lungs and stabs within the walls and ceilings. He yells at Dennis to leave him be. The landlord suddenly shows up at Philip's door. This time, he brought some cops with him. Philip avoids opening the door, which leads to the officers kicking it down. The landlord is shocked to see the entire apartment being ripped to its bare structure. Officers attempt to arrest Philip, but Pumpkin Man appears and attacks and murders the officers. The landlord scurries away as he is on his way to inform the police. Pumpkin Man chases the landlord down. Just then, Detective Dennis arrives at the residential building where Pumpkin Man resides in. He bumps into the landlord, who informs him that one of his tenants has gone mad. Detective Dennis questions the name, to which the landlord says Philip's full name. Detective Dennis knew there was something suspicious about Philip. He cocks his gun and gets ready to open fire as he aims for one of the elevators. It opens and Detective Dennis opens fire into the elevator. Nobody is in there though. Detective Dennis steps into the elevator and inspects everywhere inside. He opens up the top and steps out of the elevator to see if Pumpkin Man is hiding from within. The elevator soon closes as Detective Dennis briefly catches a glimpse of the Pumpkin Man, who sends the elevator up. He's trapped. He eventually opens the gate door and hops back inside the elevator before he gets crushed. He sends it back down as the chase is on. Detective Dennis spots Pumpkin Man running blocks ahead. He sprints towards the Pumpkin Man, getting closer by the minute. He opens fire at the Pumpkin Man, where he lands a bullet to the shoulder. Pumpkin Man goes down, and this lets Detective Dennis catch up to the Pumpkin Man. But once he arrives at the start of the alleyway, he finds nothing but a puddle of blood. He kneels down to check, but he's suddenly stabbed by the Pumpkin Man. Detective Dennis is pushed back against the wall and falls into the ground. A car is heard starting up as we see headlights approaching him quickly. Detective Dennis avoids being crushed just in time as he sees the vehicle speeding off into the distance. He has no choice but to stop an oncoming car and orders the driver to give up their car. Detective Dennis drives off as the driver of the car is left angry. He phones the police and reports Detective Dennis. There is an insane car chase going on between him and the Pumpkin Man. Detective Dennis attempts to open fire at the car speeding away, but runs out of bullets. We see helicopters appearing from the sky as we see the police perspective. They think it's another reckless street racing situation. Officers are coming from different directions and heading towards the intersection where Pumpkin Man and Detective Dennis are about to cross. The police cars stop Dennis from driving further and they have a collision. Pumpkin Man drives away as Detective Dennis is frustrated. Officers order Detective Dennis to step out of the vehicle. He reloads another clip into his gun and closes his eyes to do a quick prayer. We are outside the street. The officers are still shouting and ordering Dennis to step out of the vehicle, but he steps out and he opens fire at the cops. He looks ahead as he sees Pumpkin Man's vehicle being stopped by the other officers. Pumpkin Man escapes into a subway station. Detective Dennis chases after him and he opens fire at more officers who order him to stop. Detective Dennis chases after him and he opens fire at more officers who order him to stop. There is another train chase going on as Pumpkin Man enters each car, attempting to lose Detective Dennis. Pumpkin Man finally stops at one car where he sees Lucy by the corner. He runs there and asks where the hell she's been. Lucy states that she's been taking a visit to Coney Island. Pumpkin Man is pissed at Lucy. He begins to bring up the broken promises that has been made for him and questions her about the easy life he was going to have once he made that sacrifice for her. Lucy stays quiet. She says that there will always be consequences for the choices he chooses. Pumpkin Man is sick of Lucy. He thinks she's just trying to escape her way out of the wrongdoings. But before Pumpkin Man can even argue further, bullets blast through the window as Detective Dennis has caught up to the Pumpkin Man. Pumpkin Man dodges the bullets that Detective Dennis shoots until he runs out of ammo. Detective Dennis resorts to getting physical, and he and Pumpkin Man have a brawl inside the train. Pumpkin Man gets the upper hand as he stabs at Detective Dennis again. He slams against one of the windows before he smashes his head into the pole of the middle of the car. The train stops, and Pumpkin Man escapes into Coney Island, chasing Lucy down. Detective Dennis gets up in time and goes after the Pumpkin Man while he's after Lucy. He's still aggravated with her and chases her down. It all ends in a big mirror funhouse. Pumpkin Man finally catches up to Lucy, where she's nowhere to be found. All Pumpkin Man really sees is the altered reflections of himself. He breaks down and stabs all the mirrors. He yells for Lucy, who has betrayed him and has never rewarded him for the sacrifices and tasks he's done for her. He claims that he believed in her, but where is she now? Detective Dennis is approaching the funhouse. Pumpkin Man hides as Detective Dennis sees countless reflections of the Pumpkin Man. The real one, who had appeared through one of the mirrors, attacks Detective Dennis. They both have a bloody and gruesome brawl inside the funhouse as mirrors crash and break. Pumpkin Man finally has Detective Dennis in a chokehold down into the floor. He could crush his neck right now. This is where we take a look at Pumpkin Man's perspective and see that he thinks he's choking Lucy instead. Lucy laughs and mocks him. This only angers the Pumpkin Man. She continues to tease him as the Pumpkin Man grabs a giant shard of glass nearby. But before he stabs Detective Dennis, he is shot down. The Pumpkin Man stumbles down into the floor as we see the captain with a shotgun armed in his hand. Detective Dennis gets up and is helped by the captain. The captain explains that there was a big misunderstanding and he didn't know that he was going after the Pumpkin Man. The captain takes a good look at the body and looks down in disappointment. Detective Dennis assures the captain that the madness is finally over. We close off the film by zooming out of the shot of the captain and the detective standing before the Pumpkin Man's dead body as we see police cars arriving at the scene. Thunder booms across the skies as we look up to see a storm is about to brew. Cut to black. The end. Oh my god. Whew. Fuck me, dude. Yeah. So that was pretty much it. That was the whole plan of what was going to be Pumpkin Man. This was written way back in like freaking April, I think. I think this was like right before I was even going to start writing Street Boy. But yeah, this is what I was really trying to make. I knew that this was going to be requiring to have a bigger budget, but you know, like I don't even have that fucking money right now. Plus I'm in college, so it's like I don't even have the time either. But you know, I'm really interested to go back to this character. I've kind of started to rewrite his script again because as interesting as this movie sounded, I personally don't think it would have been that great. I mean, yeah, there's ideas in there that sound really cool, sound interesting, but I don't know. Looking at this again, I feel like, I don't know, it's just kind of weird, but you know, it might be really good. It might sound really good for other people who are listening, but for me, I'm not sure. I don't know where to really stand on this version, because I wrote two versions, one taking place present day and the other one taking place in the 80s. But this new version I'm about to write is more taking place around this time. I don't really want to share my ideas, but all I can say is I'm just glad I found a plot, at least, for this dude, because it's just so challenging for some reason. Like, this is, you know, a character, this is a slasher killer, you know, like, you can make any story up with this dude, but for me, it's like, I kind of also care about, like, just not making a generic sucky film, you know what I mean? Like, I want to make something that's super intriguing and interesting, like Halloween, you know, it's interesting, but it's simple, you know? So that's what I kind of wanted to strive for with this character. You know, originally I was like, I want to make something like American Psycho, where I might have something to say, but I don't know, I'm kind of not in that, in the level of writing, you know, if you guys get what I'm saying. I kind of haven't reached that level of writing, and it's honestly kind of hard to pull too, because you would have to create so much perspectives and all this shit. But yeah, that's pretty much how this is one of the versions that Pumpkin Man. I don't think I would want to share my other version because that one kind of just sucked. But yeah, yeah, that's fucking it, dude. Jesus Christ. Hope you guys have a good October, and honestly, I don't know. Maybe we might see Pumpkin Man way more because I have so much ideas about this dude. I can't make, a full-on feature film, but I'm hella interested in making like a short film or, little fake teaser trailers and commercials just based off this motherfucker. Like him being the mascot of the commercials, like, because it's funny, he's become kind of like an inside joke in a way for me and my friends because they know about him. Yeah, so thank you guys for listening. Those 5 people who actually give a shit, thank you for tuning in, and hopefully the illustrations were as interesting as hearing the story. But yeah, take care, guys.